It's 11:47 p.m. The room is dark except for one rectangle of light, held 6 inches from a face that isn't really looking at anything anymore. A thumb moves. Then again. Then again. Nobody decided to keep scrolling. It's just still happening. Somewhere in the last hour, a decision was made. And it wasn't made by the person holding the phone. You know this feeling. Not the phone specifically. The feeling. There's just 5 more minutes that becomes 50. The moment you surface, blinking, and check the clock like you're checking someone else's mistake. You didn't plan to lose that time. You didn't even enjoy most of it. And yet somehow, putting it down felt harder than picking it up ever did. For a long time, the story we told about this was simple. You're weak. You're distracted. You need more discipline. Try that story on for a second and notice how it doesn't fit. Because the same weak person can read a 200-page book in a weekend when it grips them, can sit still for a 3-hour film, can lose themselves in a conversation until the restaurant closes around them. Willpower isn't the missing ingredient. Something else is happening. Something built on purpose, by people who understood exactly what they were doing. That's the part nobody tells you at school. There is an entire discipline. Quite well funded, extremely good at its job. Dedicated to one question: how do you make a human being unable to look away? And the answer they found didn't come from magic. It came from a casino floor. Picture a slot machine. Not for the jackpot. For the pull itself. The lever, the spin, the half second where the symbols are still moving and anything could happen. That half second is the most valuable moment in the entire machine, more valuable, in a strange way, than winning. Because winning ends the tension. The spin is where the brain lights up. Researchers who study reward have a name for this. A variable ratio schedule. A reward that comes sometimes, unpredictably, instead of every time. It turns out the brain doesn't chase certainty. It chases maybe. A vending machine that gives you a snack every single time you press the button gets boring fast. A machine that gives you a snack most of the time, but not always, and you never know which time it'll be. That's the one people keep pressing, not because the snack is better, because the not knowing is its own reward. Now look at the rectangle in your hand differently. Every pull to refresh is a lever. Every unopened notification is a spinning wheel that hasn't landed yet. You don't know if the next post will be nothing, or the thing that makes you laugh, or the comment that makes you feel seen. That uncertainty is not a bug in the design. It is the entire design. And here's the part that reframes everything you just heard. The anticipation is doing more work than the reward. The half second before you open the app lights up the same reward circuitry as the reward itself, sometimes more, which means you're not addicted to what's on the other side of the screen. You're addicted to not knowing what's on the other side of the screen. The phone doesn't have to be good. It only has to be uncertain. This is where the first ache starts to make sense. The physical resistance to putting it down. You're not fighting boredom. You're fighting an open loop, a spinning wheel your mind hasn't let land yet. Closing the app before it resolves feels, neurologically, like walking away from a slot machine mid-spin. Of course it's hard. It was built to be hard. There's a second layer underneath even that. The brain doesn't just respond to rewards. It responds to the gap between what it expected and what it got. Neuroscientists describe an underlying signal here, sometimes called a prediction error, and a reward that's slightly better than expected tends to fire far more strongly than one that simply arrives on schedule. An infinite feed is, structurally, a machine for generating that gap over and over. Most posts land flat, and then, unpredictably, one lands harder than expected. A joke that actually lands, a clip that actually moves something. And that single spike is enough to make the next 100 flat scrolls feel worth wading through. You're not scrolling for the average post. You're scrolling for the next spike, and the feed is long precisely because spikes have to stay rare to keep working. But the reward schedule is only half the machine. The other half is older than any app, older than any screen. It's social. For most of human history, being noticed by your group wasn't a nice feeling, it was survival information. Exile from the tribe meant death. So somewhere very deep, the nervous system still treats social approval like oxygen. A like. An apply. A little red circle with a number in it. None of these existed 20 years ago, and yet the brain reads them the way it once read a nod from an elder, a laugh from a friend around a fire. The interface changed. The wiring didn't. Put those two things in the same object. Unpredictable reward and a constant quantified stream of social approval, and you haven't built an app. You've built the single most compelling psychological environment a human nervous system has ever encountered, and you've put it in every pocket, on every table, next to every bed. Here's a question worth sitting with for a moment. If this system is this effective, who benefits from how effective it is? Not you. That's the quiet part. Every minute you spend inside that loop is a minute being sold. To advertisers, to algorithms trained to keep the loop tightening. The product being sold isn't a video or a photo. It's your attention, packaged and auctioned in fractions of a second you never see. The app isn't failing to hold your interest by accident. Holding your interest is the entire business model. The longer the spin, the more valuable you become. Not to yourself, to someone else's spreadsheet. That's not a conspiracy. It's just an incentive, followed all the way to its logical end by extremely talented people who are very well paid to follow it. Somewhere in a room, a team once looked at two versions of a feature and chose the one that made people stay 11% longer. Nobody in that room was evil. They were doing their job. It's just that their job, multiplied across a billion pockets, becomes something with a gravity of its own. One that doesn't especially care whether you meant to spend your evening this way. So what does it actually cost? Not in hours, everybody already censors the hours. But underneath that, the first cost is attention itself, which turns out to be a muscle, not a fixed resource. Every time the loop interrupts a longer thought. A book, a conversation, a walk without a destination. That muscle gets a little weaker at holding on. People report finishing fewer books not because books changed, but because sitting with one idea for 40 minutes starts to feel almost physically uncomfortable, like a limb that's fallen asleep. That discomfort isn't laziness. It's a skill quietly atrophying from disuse. The second cost is stranger, and it hides in the numbers under your own posts. When approval becomes something you can literally watch accumulate in real time, a very old part of the brain starts treating the number as the verdict. Not the moment, not the memory, the count. A photo that felt joyful to take can feel disappointing an hour later, not because anything about it changed, but because the tally came in lower than hoped. Self-worth was never designed to be checked 40 times a day. Now it often is, and the third cost is the quietest one, the disappearance of boredom. Boredom used to be the doorway to almost everything. Daydreams, half-formed ideas, the itch that makes a person pick up a guitar, or a pen just to have something to do with their hands. Every spare gap used to be unfilled space, and unfilled space is where a mind goes looking for itself. Now the gap gets filled within seconds of forming. The elevator ride, the queue, the ad break, the pause before falling asleep. All of it absorbed before the mind has a chance to wander anywhere interesting. We haven't just lost some hours. We may have lost the empty rooms where a lot of our better thoughts used to be born. There's a fourth cost, and it's the one that sounds the most like a contradiction until you sit with it. The loneliness. More people are in contact with more other people, more constantly than at any point before this. And a great many of them report feeling more isolated, not less. Part of the reason is that the platform is very good at simulating connection without requiring the harder, slower parts of it. The shared silence, the inconvenience of showing up somewhere in person, the risk of being fully seen rather than curated. 100 people can see a story you posted, and not one of them is actually with you in the room. The nervous system, still reading the world the old way, registers the attention. But some other, quieter part of it knows the difference between being watched and being known. And that part doesn't stop asking for the second thing just because the first one is easier to get. If you've made it this far and some part of this already feels like your own last week described back to you, you're not alone in that. And it might be worth admitting, if only to yourself, which app owns the most of your day. Not as a confession. Just as information. Here's the turn though. Because none of this is a life sentence and isn't a call for more willpower either. Willpower was never the right tool for a design system. That's a bit like trying to outmuscle a casino by staring at the slot machine harder. The actual lever is smaller and stranger than that. It's simply knowing the mechanism while it's happening. The moment you recognize this is the spin, not the reward. Mid-scroll, mid-refresh. Something changes. Not because the pool disappears. Because you stop mistaking it for your own free choice and start seeing it as what it is. A very well-designed nudge, aimed at a very old nervous system that you now happen to understand. From there, the changes that actually work tend to be quiet and structural, not heroic. A phone left in another room does more than a promise made to yourself at midnight. A notification turned off does more than willpower exercised 40 times a day. Small, boring environmental choices. Because you can't out-discipline a system built by people studying you for a living, but you can simply refuse to stand where the trap is set. What's the last thing you made or noticed or wondered about purely because you were bored enough to go looking for it? It's worth sitting with that question for a second longer than feels natural. Because that discomfort, the little itch of nothing to do, used to be where a lot of you came from. None of this makes you broken, and it never did. It makes you a normal nervous system standing in an environment built, with real skill, to be irresistible to normal nervous systems. That's not a character flaw. It's just the truth of the room you're standing in. And the strange comfort in that truth is this. Once you can see the room, you're no longer only a subject inside the experiment. You're someone reading it back. That's really what a reset is. Not throwing the phone away, not swearing off the internet, but simply refusing to let the spin decide for you what your attention was for. If this is the kind of thing your mind quietly enjoys pulling apart, the hidden architecture behind ordinary behavior, the reasons under the reasons, there's a lot more of it waiting here, every week, for people who'd rather understand the room than just live in it.